Slop. Slop. Think about that word. It implies some sort of lower quality. But let me level you for a second. In exactly what way is AI-generated content lower quality than the average human creation? Count the pixels and the minutes. There's no chance. For every limit someone imposes on generative AI, it's only a few months or even weeks from being solved. The consistency of AI-generated video is now lifelike. Its quality is often higher than most CGI. Often people can tell the difference from reality. Hands? Fixed. Sentence errors? Fixed. Nowadays we even have AI-generated worlds. Look at Genie 3. It can generate video games from a prompt, essentially. And it's only gonna get better. So why call it slop, considering the increasing quality? There's lots of human-made slop as well. Given how good it got in just a few years, if anything, it's gonna be the opposite. You know, lots of non-AI content is gonna be slop. Right now, we are at the threshold of infinite creativity, where content creation will be the most available at every level that it's ever been. To not use these tools is to be left behind. How can one line or one note at a time compete with an image or a song made in 10 seconds? And often, the AI one will be better. Like, do you understand? So you see, you are all updating yourselves by calling AI content as slop. Because AI content isn't slop. Because it has continuous improvement, and soon you won't even be able to tell anything apart. You'll be eating your words of every possible criticism you could have. So you see, AI content isn't slop. Because the entire medium is slop. Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message guy, once said any new medium uses the old one as its content. Right now, parasitically, generative AI is using the internet as its content. So it is more important to analyze what generative AI does as a medium than renounce the slop it produces. I claim to say that no matter how good AI gets, it's always gonna be slop, because given our current system of incentives, that's what it leads. It's the signal-to-noise ratio, vastly favoring noise. A cultural grey goo that will make us stop recognizing what quality even looks like. And much worse than that, collapse our shared reality and make us all victims of the ensuing consequences. Did we ask for this? If this is the first time you ask yourself that, then you are, even if unknowingly, probably riding the tech bro wave accelerating off of a cliff. But before we can even discuss the consequences of slop, we have to go through a lot of false equivalencies tech bro makes. So, brace yourself, I guess. A few years ago, I made a list alongside a group I was with on Facebook to see what is the most common used excuses by tech bros on why AI is no problem at all, or why it's the next thing that you must embrace and all of that. Well, out of all of the answers, two of them were the most important, I feel. And one of them is this one right here. An AI learns just like a human. Let me see if you heard this one. TechBro tells you that AI making art learns as it's inspired just like a human. Miles of servers using linear algebra consuming gigawatts of power, or a stack of RTX 4090s. Being the same as carbon-based brains using like 15 watts of energy from a Big Mac or something. And from this, you are supposed to accept this half-assed attempt to your own technologically dictated demise. But the phrase, the brain is like a computer, is, and has always been, just a metaphor. Even before getting into this dishonest comparison, there is immediately a huge doublethink when put next to their other preferred excuse, it's just a tool. OpenAI, in one of their papers, tries to excuse their practices by claiming their models learn just like a child. Yet, Scam Altman is seen continuously claiming LLMs like ChatGPT are just another tool. Everyone should pressure tech pros and CEOs with this obvious contradiction. On one hand, We are told generative AI models are evolved enough so that they can experience something as especially unique as in humans, such as inspiration. But on the other, we see the same tech bros using the tool excuse to blame everything that the machine spits out as their own creations, and putting the onus on you to prove them wrong. Following their own claims, what they are essentially doing would be digital slavery. So, if I were to become an advocate for AI rights, considering their vision, the first thing I would do is protect the poor AI for having all these parasitical humans appropriating its work. But that's ridiculous, isn't it? Following this rotten logic, we end up in entire hypothetical scenarios with only metaphorical tangents to reality. The only thing that's real and accurate here is the endless excuse and false equivalencies propagated by tech bros. It's their bread and butter, their lifeblood. Without it, their sophistry crumbles, but crumble it should. So let's dig in. In the book, The Science and Art of Drawing, Harold Speed explains how all children have their sense of vision first informed by other senses. Everyone starts by first attaining the minimum viable neurosymbolical approximations of reality as imagined, not represented. This creates the language of symbols, which makes it so that children draw an eye as a circle with a dot on it, trees shaped like this, the sun shaped like that, houses like squares with a triangle on top, etc. The sense of touch informs the child with the sense of hardness, softness, for example, and whatever abstraction the mind comes up to conjure up those as takes priority over the isolated expertise of such senses. For softness and hardness, a common example is that of Bulba and Kiki, for example. Touch informs audition and audition informs sight. With no explanation whatsoever, everyone can identify which is Bulba and which is Kiki. Most progress a draftsman has when learning how to draw is, in a way, to unlearn this primordially abstract language of signs and start letting vision inform itself. In other words, one must learn to deassociate the symbol of eyes, mouth, and nose and instead think of form, light, proportion, and so on, and practice those to the point of intuitively understanding the world as it's represented in front of them, and not how it's imagined. Yet the symbols remain. We simply learn how to understand what they are. Stylization, for example, comes from mixing abstractions with representation. One who does not come to, rationally and/or intuitively, develop their fundamentals, such as perspective, value, composition, proportion, anatomy, will continue to have their childlike sense of symbolic abstraction inculcated. Each one of those fundamentals is an entire field of study, and is approached as so. Even in the hypothetical world where AI is inspired, inspiration is a very small part of the process. The Faber aspect of creation is the most of it. Most thinking happens on the canvas, with the pen coursing through it, on the guitar, with fingers plucking the chords, on the clay, with every gesture modeling and carving based on the previous. The connection from the mind and the hands providing back and forth solutions to every minutia. Does the AI have a similar sense of the fundamentals in their practice? Does it have an understanding of the process itself? Because the process is everything when discussing things like these, not results. So, see how everything I said thus far is reliant on sensory information. Our senses interact directly with the universe. They don't backpropagate in the matrix of weights and biases. Input isn't stimuli. We may use the biological and the digital as metaphors for each other, but not as identical. It is safer to say that von Neumann and neuromorphic architectures are based on X and Y approximations of how we interpret the human brain, on how it might work. To claim equivalency is ridiculous in more than one domain. In physics or chemistry, we do immediately care about base differences from elements such as silicon and carbon, let alone the higher level constructs made from them. All life is carbon-based. Even if deep learning's mimicry of intelligence becomes sophisticated enough that it can showcase an identical copy of yourself through a screen, under scientific scrutiny, you'll still have more unfamiliar with the closest mollusk in your vicinity than your digital replica. For even a mollusk has autopoiesis, something that, thanks to systems such as metabolism, all of life is based on. See? The mass of any object is not just the sum total of all its particles of matter, but also the forces which bind those particles together. For living organisms, the later part is far more important. Autopoiesis allows isolated systems to maintain their own identity when exchanging particle interactions with the outside world. converting matter from the environment and appropriating it into themselves. That's what life is. Always in flux. In 7 years, pretty much every cell in your body will be different, yet you are still you. Where is LLMs in that flux? Where are they? How come they can participate in something like creation when they do not interact with the actual world? What are the LLMs equivalents to abstract thinking processes? Considering LLMs do not do as such, and instead base themselves off of the totality of humanity as outputted based on our experiences in the world, wouldn't that make it so that LLMs can, no matter how many lakes we dry out for the sake of compute, only operate within the basis of a bottleneck to a bottleneck? The sum of human data about the world is not the world. With no sensory information, we cannot claim AI to learn like a human. AI intelligence we know of is embodied. So it is on the tech bros to go against millennia worth of knowledge if they are to claim otherwise. Of course, they can play the AGI card and say to give it some years and it'll attain some sort of generalized thinking as we have. I doubt even that there would be any worthwhile equivalency, but as it currently stands, LLMs aren't that. We must not allow them to offset very current worries and dangers to a future where hypothetical technology ties all loose ends. This is cold thinking. Currently, in the very basis on how generative AI works, it does not allow LLMs to extrapolate, only interpolate. The former is the domain of humanity, and it's the reason something like culture is able to exist. We are far more than just our influences. You can't negate the entire experience of what allows one to create something. But of course, none of this matters, because the tech bros' ethos relies on them diminishing humanity to its most one-dimensional, minimum viable product. The ones who say that humanity can be reduced to quantized mechanisms, such as they can say we're all stochastic parrots, are the same who think AI can be fundamentally non-distinct from people. Algorithms becoming sentient and all of that. If I am to say something about it, it'd be that even if AGI truly comes to be, and can evoke knowledge outside of their dataset, the very material foundations it's made from would still be different than ours. So something within it would definitely be happening, but it wouldn't be like us, it would be something else. And what that else is needs to be epistemically dissected with such a sharper's razor we can muster. Because if we keep addressing it with our own current vocabulary, we'll effectively keep falling into our sense of pareidolia, of seeing ourselves in everything around us, and end up conjuring systems of machinic belief, which will inevitably eat into humanity's very fundamental rights. We are seeing an embryonic version of that right now with LLMs, as its outputs compete with the people responsible for its input. This whole thinks like a person argument is a giant rug pull for actual very large ethical and systemic risks this technology poses to be swept under. The devaluing, de-skilling and dehumanization of art, essentially the expression of humanity's inner being, should be serving as a giant warning for the future we're heading towards. When you accept a tree, you also accept its seed. In other words, whatever you let companies get away with today, you also let them get away with whatever they'll come up tomorrow. And this sets an awful precedent to be in the bitter end of. In an ideal future, there'll be a place for AI and there'll be a place for humanity, but unchecked, AI will occupy the space humanity used to. At the end of the day, AI still serves the interests of the worst among us, the lazy who can now pretend to write hundreds of books, the devious who can now hide themselves behind thousands of bots, the powerful who can now harvest the intellect of millions of people without compensation. It's just a fool and thinks like a human, though contradictory, are two sides of the same coin. The enemy is both too strong and too weak simultaneously. Is a common strategy employed by demagogues to promote the power of irrationality as the only possible gluing agent between the masses. No wonder something similar manifests in these arguments as well. If anything, it's closer to a toy than to a tool. For the end user keeps jumping from model to model without this discipline to actually create anything with them. It's also closer to automation than to a tool, because no user input is ever skillful or meaningful enough to the point that it couldn't just be automated wholesale. If anything, these things make a tool out of the user, as they attempt to give the false perception of skill and creativity, and so make the user dependent on highly specific systems he doesn't truly own or understand. In this atmosphere of being so codependent with these algorithms, no wonder the tech bro comes to humanize his crutch. It's such a wonderful excuse. He may so violently obfuscate himself from his own uselessness, and thus willingly accept his obsolescence. So when comes the urge to make as many people as possible to accept this type of view? The normalization of dehumanization is sought by the ones who already deny the self. To let companies get away with legislating the humanization of their products means that people's rights inevitably get swept away as a consequence. Corporations have, in many places, effectively stronger rights than people, so unfortunately the odds aren't in our favor. Yet, every instant we don't fight against these views as they rise is one where we, slowly but surely, accept the world to be turned into a hell for Silicon Valley to rule over. As for me, the whole of culture being reduced to a grey goo is reason enough to fight against the unscrupulous propagation of this technology. That I could be living in a world where I look at anything and can no longer know that there is indeed a reason behind the many aspects of the objects I observe, that they can no longer add up to something meaningful, such as the sublime or the gestalt, is, well, a world without intentionality. In such a world, unless highly socially engineered out of their own individual will, people will find less and less reasons to keep on living. To live is to struggle, and to make art is to struggle meaningfully. You let this go, you'll create a void. One we might no longer be able to diagnose, for we won't be able to remember what we've lost. This is the soul of the world being snuffed out. Silicon Valley wants to sell you its carcass, in hopes you won't notice. It won't be easy to maintain your humanity in the world they're building, but you must struggle for your own, and for the greater good. So, another thing to note, ever since I stopped writing the script months ago, new AI agents came out that can operate directly on your computer, including programs like MS Paint, where they can draw line by line, like a person. So I think it's much better gauge on how much is like a human than diffusion models ever could be. So yeah, if you test it out, you'll see that it can't draw very well at all. It's almost like there's no human equivalent for diffusion, which meshes together all of the dataset of all of humanity for its output. The real question forever is, trained on a pre-20th century dataset, could generative AI invent jazz or general relativity? Because if not, what we've got is a very fast Rube Goldberg machine that will give us endless iterations of what we already had, stifling whatever new there could be, devaluing all things. Now on why AI is, quote-unquote, just like X previous technologies. Let me see if you heard this one. A highly disruptive technology such as LLMs is being rapidly adopted regardless of its net negatives. To excuse those negatives, you are supposed to bend over and treat the changes that it brings out as set in stone. The tech bro tells you all this whilst comparing it to previous technological revolutions. Of course, the tech bro doesn't actually care about either of the semblances or differences the integration of new technologies have had on society. He simply must, by whatever lengths his rhetoric allow, make you focus on a tiny isle of superficial comparisons so you don't notice the sea of blind spots surrounding it. These are, more often than not, bundles of false equivalencies, but false equivalencies are, after all, the bread and butter of the tech bro. So much like we are told ad nauseum that AI is just like the camera, or the car, or the printing press, I think it is important to know where things like this actually differ and where they are actually similar. For they very likely won't be what tech bro wishes them to be. One thing to start off is to acknowledge that technological progress does not imply societal progress. Often it can hamper it. In systems of exploitation or oppression, a new technology being integrated in said systems mostly gives new avenues for exploitation and oppression. These might be mitigated later down the line should regulation effectively empower the majority. But without it, essentially, technological revolution without social revolution will only exacerbate the vices of the current system. As we are now, social progress is many steps behind the technological progress. So to think justice is something that will just naturally develop by itself under any regiment is erroneous. LLMs can't exactly benefit the public good because the public good has yet to truly benefit sui generis from the rise of even the personal computer. Yes, the immense rise of productivity computation has brought to the world, when compared to the endless bureaucracy of paperwork beforehand, did not manage, even though that, to shave off the work week even by 1 day, or even by 1 hour. It merely sped things up, and as the surplus of that labor went only to the top. Of course, some new jobs came in, taking the place of others. People could adapt because they were still adapting to do, but no revolution, to be said, happened. So work hours didn't flinch. This isn't like factory labor, to which the working public at some point voiced their plight loud enough to the level of legislating the reworking of the working hours. The weekend, as well as the 8-hour work day standard, were created in such a way, not when technology became available, but when the public said enough, and did what they could to enforce fair distribution of the additionally generated value. However, the comfort of computation kept us pedaling under a promise we are still falling into. And at some point, we'll have to acknowledge that the digital world, thanks to the coupling of LLMs in the internet, can become much more a system of control and surveillance than one of liberation and democratization. One thing computers brought to the public sphere for sure was a social-cultural paradigm shift, a radicalization of ontology begetting the accelerated world it implied, novelty after novelty, the momentum of economic growth, the aesthetic fetishism of the digital. All these never slowed down to ponder something like what is being lost, what is being gained. Are the value of these being distributed fairly, on a wide enough scale? A dataist world seeks to reduce everything to data. Cars wanted the world's surface to be turned into endless lanes. Computers want all possible things to become computable. A rush to turn every quantifiable aspect of the world into market share, commoditized and repackaged. We are still in the high of that rush. And now, with the majority of the public under threat by the generative AI, for as Goldman Sachs predicts as many as 300 million jobs to be negatively impacted, are we then able to perhaps finally carve a space to discuss how the digital can truly benefit the common person? But to do so, we mustn't fall into the ungrounded corporate lingo of faux pas, utopic visions that CEOs and their tech bro herds expound. Because if we do, we'll fall into the false assumption that technology has always brought about common good by itself. Differences between technologies are important, and so are the time and place that they were introduced in. So, taking in account what was said so far, let's dabble into the preferred technological false equivalencies tech bros are so adamant about. Such as the printing press. Printing press. The world is like a book and God is the writer. From the darkness of illiteracy came an age where the art of the word could become common ground. Associating the intricacies of things with one another helped magnify the world of signs beyond the grasp of dominance it used to represent. It freed the minds of men, the most out of anything before, because suddenly everyone could follow long strings of thought from anyone who put ink to the page. It allowed a larger comprehension of the world, and so formed a larger consciousness of what it meant to be a human, a citizen, a professional, and the relationships between all these fields, as well as the many classes and categories of things and people. Could there be a stronger stimuli for intellect? The appearance of the printing press in no way can be detached from the conditions it introduced itself in. But before delving directly into this false equivalency, there is one thing I've heard more than once from tech evangelicals. The following. Socrates thought writing was going to ruin the minds of men because no longer had to use the memory to retain thoughts, and then they point how wrong he was. And this hence used as a crutch to when literally every aspect of technological progress is given scrutiny. But this tries to make Socrates' worries ahistorical. So let me inquire then, in what aspects was he right? Because without past proof of writing working as a social boon, then I can see why old Socrates came to think of that would mean the loss of something as vital as on-place discussion of ideas, or the gathering of the Homeric hymns, which were essentially to inspire bring community together. To Socrates, you were your thoughts, and to discard them into paper would quickly create bad habits, where the mind would start to expel itself out of you and become disembodied. Though he was proven wrong in the rearview mirror of history, Socrates himself in his time wasn't wrong. Every old generation complains about the new, and every old generation is right, says Jacques Burzum. This is because, unlike the new, the old generation has an incredibly firm, grounded structure that was proven to work, at least in a given amount of time, and the people from those old generations can't become uninfluenced from those structures. The new generation, at that point, yet has nothing, and when it comes to civilization, order always beats chaos. So in a way, whatever new methods are created, still need, by necessity, to conform to the ways of the old. Solely through hitting a wall many enough times to see what works, the new methods come to develop a nature of their own. But before that, they closely follow what came before. Notice how Plato wrote in dialogue, but Aristotle did so in the first person. Plato was following Socrates, who feared writing in his writing. Because Socrates was right, and writing had to become right if it meant to replace the type of discourse and memorization Socrates thought so important. But with millennia of development, the written word has proven to develop thought far more than to restrain it. and only then could something like the printing press, as the method of propagation of writing, could prove itself as a boon by extension, because distribution was far from equitable before. So, to the common man, what was there before the press? The word of mouth, mostly from uneducated communities, and, when from the educated ones, often as a top-down rhetoric to dominate those who know less and maintain the current motives of class interest. The twilight of the printing press gave a way for every person to suddenly not have to conform in both body and mind to the mere extension of the feudal system. Why? Because by enriching their own inner world model, yes, I'm using tech words, they found their own sovereign sense of self, and far more avenues opened on the visions of what the world outside, much like the world inside, could be. Order always beats chaos if civilization is to maintain itself. So it's not like everyone suddenly wanted the world to themselves. If anything, literacy allowed the understanding of all possible avenues and their boundaries as well. For it too developed empathy, for any person could now better know what's like to be someone else's mind. It brought about the prime of civility, and eventually the Enlightenment. So what does the tech bro actually mean when comparing the printing press to generative AI? Is the then versus now anything like the conditions of which the printing press was introduced itself in? And what generative AI is proven to be able to better our lives to replace many aspects of it? Considering the rapidly accelerated climate we're in, will it even have the time to prove anything? Or will it simply be forced down our throats regardless? If the literacy brought by the printing press was light rays clearing the way of the dark fog of the unassociated world, then generative AI shows itself as rapidly flashing light in an already hyperlit neon world. It adds itself not into an untouched medium, but rather as yet more noise into a world saturated with so many signs that their crowded ruckus ends up severing the associations which made them exist in the first place. Today's world is one of excess, not one of lacking, unlike most centuries. The introduction of high-speed generation of content that has yet to prove its worth into a world already clogged with content is not tantamount to illumination, but to creation of waste. Now, it does seem that there's few things more profitable than generating waste. But the last thing the world needs, as in one made by people and not money, needs, is yet more content. We need less content. We should have content destroyers, not creators at this point. Because where we are now is a world which has proven that bringing about the age of information did not bring about the age of knowledge. If anything, it provided more excuses for common folk to willingly obfuscate themselves from literacy, many thanks to the attention-seeking algorithms existing only due to the profit motive. The rapid flow of information into flashier and shorter bytes is destroying the capacity of anyone to follow a thought to the end, not enhancing it. It follows that in such an ecosystem, the introduction of unfiltered waste will further corrode trust, thought, and the willingness to muster in order to solve hard problems. So the person as a unit of civilization attains sovereignty and selfdom only in the virtual sense, one dissociated from what he can actually think or do, and becomes entirely dependent on what highly complex machinery shows him what he can pretend to have thought or have done. This doesn't add up to anything of value, literally. The individual becomes incapable of generating value to himself or others. Personal, social, or economic value cannot be created when everyone is this skilled to the ground level, and where the output of said tools requires so little investment and spit out so much crap that no fulfillment can come either from the prompter and the end user in the long run. It's back into a feudal-like world of complete dependency on the owners of its disruptive technology. So, how is it like the printing press? It isn't. This false equivalency propagated by any means necessarily due to the self-interest of the worst motivations humanity can display, willingly blinding anyone from not seeing any complexity 1 inch below the surface. The printing press brought the possibility of literacy to the masses. Generative AI will make sure no one is able to think them for themselves in any valuable way again. One stimulated the mind, the other will atrophy. The camera. You only have to push a button in a camera. Camera only transformed art, it didn't end it. Okay, listen, TechMite. To assume that the camera, in its origin, was anything like the one you have today is to commit first-degree murder of reasonable thinking. In the beginning stages of the camera, you had to nearly be a damn chemist to operate it. Yes, it disrupted the art world, but so at a time where there were still many unexplored avenues for painting and such to go into, the vanguard. Again, you must consider the historical backdrop. Mostly, production of art followed the church, rich patrons and the like, so, holistically, the camera broke the ice when draftsmanship was immaculate, but creativity was frozen shut next to whoever barrened its potential. To separate it and the rise of modernism is ridiculous. Every field was getting hyper-specialized, going places previously unoccupied. The slow development of this primitive state of the camera into the versions we know of today is what allows the time and space for new forms of art to emerge. Even then, the photo could only portray the world as it is. It can't generate what the lens doesn't capture. This might be crazy, but when you take a picture of the lizard and the world the lizard lives in is important to the equation of how the picture will turn out. Photographies also had their own ways of developing the art form. Barely anyone else had a better intuitive understanding of framing and lighting, and the patience to wait for the light subject to appear at the right moment, cost what it may. So we have two things already unlike generative AI. The camera did one thing and the tech developed slowly so that new movements of expression could occupy the new spaces opened in its wake. To operate the camera is not the click of a button. It requires knowledge of the real world and the tool itself, as well as the willingness to learn and execute it. Machine learning advances rapidly and generates in many fields, occupying new potential fields faster than any genuine art movement may emerge. In a world where countless avenues have already been explored, and as such it's harder to break new ground anywhere wholesale. It also requires no skill. Any idea of that prompting takes skill is completely virtual, for the whole process could be automatable, and there is no visible distinction whether something became better because of a better prompt, or it was just a lucky 7. Even if such a distinction could be made, the enormous amount of output with such a low bar of entry quickly erodes any semblance of value-generating skill that could come from operating in such an ecosystem. The output often is larger than the input. That's not value. That's not expression. It's not art. It's waste. The camera in people's smartphones did not create a whole new generation of expert photographers or filmmakers. It did, however, banalize photography and film to the point that the immense overexposure anyone is forced into every day has eaten into the special event that used to be the experience of cinema or a gallery. Did it bring some cool new stuff to the table? Of course, but it is ridiculous to think of it all as an overall boon to humanity. That type of flattening of art into content, thanks to AI, will happen to everything. You'll yearn for the innocent days of analog cameras like never before, but there won't be any going back, because again, this is a false equivalency. To have generative AI compared to the camera requires a low understanding of both, as well as the shape of the society to which the introduction of either happens to. The automobile. You're like horses complaining about the car. And yes, I am, because people aren't horses. Sure, people who did any sort of job related to the management of horses in the society got slowly replaced. But it was merely one area of employment, and the production of automobiles was famously one of the greatest job creators in the history of the modern world. However, it was no human job to actually be a horse. And yes, with AI, we are essentially the horse right now. So without mass dehumanization, AI cannot make a profit. You don't want to know what happens to the great portion of horses at the time. But hey, with such billionaire ideologies such as accelerationism, long-termism, and dark enlightenment, the putting down of mass swatches of newly made useless eaters of humanity may not be out of the cards at all. So maybe you are right, tech bro. It is kind of like when the automobile was invented, just not in the way that you seem to mean it. Unless you have a death wish, or are just really stupid. Either way, we can find some similarities with AI in the proliferation of the automobile as much as we can find differences. But these are not the type of thing tech bros would like you to be talking about, because it isn't pretty. For starters, my opinion is that most of the applications we find for the personal car hurt the world and its people far more than it benefits. Fordism was so influential and powerful that it took the world by storm, including places where it ought to have not. To this day, car companies have such a steel grip on urban planning of nearly every country via lobbying that it makes it so that it's almost impossible to imagine a world where most of our walking space isn't reserved for dangerous alloy speedsters to roam about, and contributing to most of the CO2 emissions as well as one of the most common types of urban deaths, and one of the most principal factors in the overall stress and anxiety, and one of the largest money sinks in people's lives. And, well, cars really are no replacement for public transportation, that's what I'm getting at. The type of brainwashing we've been led into made it so that getting a car became just as much as a milestone in a person's life as graduating, marrying, and having a child.
It is something people are coerced into looking forward to since infancy. Manufactured consent is at the very heart of the issue here. Think about it. Cars may have made sense for the flat geographical topology of America. But what about the mountainous topology of Europe? Well, of course not, but Fordism didn't care, so our collective psychology, in the fever of the automobile, became market share. And we're no longer owners of that share. The illusion of freedom it provides is only so in direct proportion in how much it prevents public transit from being viable. Considering the physical space it inherently has to occupy for its propagation, it's one of those cases where private success means public loss, directly. So it is like generative AI, after all, right? You're right, Tech Bros. I'll go to 100k in depth to get my Tesla and the Neuralink by Elon, so I can have ads directly beamed into my brain before dying of lithium poisoning. Sure, you're right. But in all seriousness though, as you can notice, so far, applying perfect neutrality to technology is always a fiction. Technology is not introduced into a vacuum. Pieces are going to move inevitably to other places, following already existing power structures and class incentives. As such, you could ask then, what does technology want? A car wants roads, lanes, oil, even psychological overrides of values, as we became fine with the destruction of places to use our legs, and eventually street signs, sidewalks, and seatbelts. It also wanted cultural displacement, offsetting ecological worries forever into the future, and an overall faster and more anxious lifestyle for everyone. And of course, the concentration of capital in fewer hands. For the sake of comparison then, as we live in the age of the attention economy, let's compare this overtaking of the world by lanes to the overtaking of our attention by AI. Trust me. The biggest differences here are twofold. Although cars are not a long-term boon for humanity, their regulation made it so at least they became feasible tools for commuting. Whereas AI is literally trillions of dollars ready to make sure it cannot be regulated. Kind of like if we were seeing cars running people over in the streets, but CEOs or scared sidewalks and street signs would suddenly decrease their quarterly earnings. And, whereas the job displacement cars have caused was met with one of the greatest job creators of all time, generative AI, on the other hand, does not only displace far more than one singular area of work, but also does not provide any other means of employability or increased capacity to generate stable profit on your own. At best, it's rent-seeking behavior to make sure you're dependent on very specific systems that will take over every facet of your life. Your mind will be nearly filled with AI-only lanes, and so will everyone else's, collectively forgetting that their brain once could do the legwork by itself. The Internet. And we finally go digital. If a journalist previously wrote for a print paper, then he merely changed the way to write for a digital one. But what happens with generative AI? When every word wasn't written? Am I being clear the differences here? The internet provided a new space for people. Now it is being occupied by content and users without human origin. The medium of generative AI is using the internet as its content, and faster than we can comprehend. It fills every corner and crevice. Most of the internet will be filled with AI content by 2026. That's what, 4 years of this technology versus 10,000 of human civilization? What is it left for us? How will we be able to distinguish real from fake? Will we have to do away with our dependency on the internet? Is that even possible nowadays? The one thing that it democratizes is deception. The internet mixed with generative AI now provides the means for the bad actors to take the leading roles. To think that it is anything like a person hosting a website or having social media accounts or email, it's ridiculous. The internet expanded. Generative AI engulfs. And out of the many excuses, of course, it's important to say tech bros love to raise the good that it's doing for medical fields, etc. As if we're forced to take the bad with the good without filtering. As if those are even meaningfully connected and dependent on one another at all. It's always a red herring when health-related issues are evoked by tech bros. They know it's impossible to fight back against that point directly without seeming like an asshole. So health is often used as a Trojan horse to welcome in many kinds of exploitative or downright dangerous technology. It's how Elon Musk initially convinced the public on the virtues of Neuralink, whilst knowing full well that he intends to build a world where everyone is forced to drill ionized lithium onto their skulls, to keep up with the AI that he's also building. The nigh infinite versatility of machine learning can make it go any possible avenue, so it's easy to end up finding one where it seems like the good that it's doing is definitive. However, if used as an excuse to get away with everything that's possible for the technology to do, then no actual weighting of net positives and negatives can be made.
Now that is done, generative AI is forever slop because of what the medium itself incentives, and what the natural consequences of it are. So why does it remain slop even with all the improvements? Because, first of all, your brain is wired to find something special in that which it sees scarcely. As generative AI infinitely ramps up supply as demand stays the same, the resulting saturation will first and foremost result in indifference and fatigue. As we are already hypersaturated even without AI, just with currently existing contents. We already feel fatigued in relation to a lot of media. We overindulge ourselves and then wonder where the magic went. But at least there were nuggets of specialty amongst the slew, where intent and creativity were still bound to, and identifiable therein. Given the available saturation of generative AI contents and how easy it is to do it yourself, no longer will there be an aura around any noticeable piece of art. And amidst the nightmare of recommendation algorithms, and generations being brought up in such a system without knowing otherwise, to even know how to want will become nebulous. Think of it. Your favorite thing was not your favorite thing until you interacted with your favorite thing. Chrono Trigger was not my favorite game until I played Chrono Trigger. For I did not know its ins and outs in the version of me before having played it. And your taste is a sum total amount of such developments. Yet here we are, now with algorithms telling us what we like before we even learn to like anything at all. What remains is then a continuous flux of slop in and slop out, with no possibility for such a thing as a cultural artifact to ever form in this context. So the loss of an aura becomes very much real. There is nothing to communicate to others about in a society where everything is both ultra-saturated and ultra-personalized to your consumption. And so there also won't be the language, the categories, the recognizable elements one can identify any given piece to understand why it's good. Qualifying anything at all becomes instinctively alien to the post-human consumer, by the mere fact that quantity increased by so much that it became undistillable. The whole of culture has been reduced to a noisy grey goo of different shiny pretty pixel combinations, but sameness in what they actually mean. There's simply too much. Gatekeeping is actually good thing in such scenario. To prevent all type of media and crafts from being made irrelevant, that's what it is. It's not democratizing, it's trivializing. And I'll repeat that as many times as it takes. It trivializes everything it touches. Would your parents take you to see an AI-generated film when the same technology is what's compromising your education and automating you, and probably them as well, out of a job? Art was merely the canary in the coal mine when it came to generative AI. What happens to the canary will soon happen to everyone else. And that canary has long since died, and we keep going down this artificially generated cave. Not only is all intellectual labor under threat, but so is the very notion of truth and reality. And that is when generative AI becomes really dangerous. More powerful than bullets or missiles is to be able to wage war in someone's sense of reality and win. Misinformation and all that is already rampant, and oftentimes undetectable to the human eyes and ears, since models like VO3 borderline on realism in both video and audio. Even though Google has the technology to label it as with its metadata, they also have the commercial incentive to deluge us with as much as possible AI-generated crap. It's all fun and games until someone gets hurt, and someone will get hurt. Many someones, inevitably, because humanity always pushes every type of usage of technology in every direction and exploits it for as much as possible. As such, then public perception will have to shift to some side. At least some movements will have to be extremely wary of generative AI considering its real dangers. The possibility of fake wars, fake incidents, fake every scenario are very real now. And though they are fake, they engage with reality, where people can be quick to act before telling real from fake apart. Suddenly, those brought up in an artificially generated culture will be stuck in the middle of a rock and a hard place, because they did not develop the skills necessary to not be LLM dependent. It is also LLMs which corrode everyone's sense of reality. The world won't end with a bang but a whimper. Is this what they meant when they told us this? The only singularity that will exist is one of infinite trivial or fake information overwhelming the real. a heat death of signal and meaning. And I think, seeing throughout history, it can be explained in the following graph.
Okay, so let's imagine this. We have these 3 different circles to represent this part of the world, or 3 worlds separately. One of them, right here, for example, is the material world, where material things exist, the things you see, touch, and then there's the sensorial world, the things that you actually feel, the touching and the seeing and the hearing. They cannot exist without one another, but so they can't exist without the mental world, which is on top, where you can then concoct all of those things that you felt into something cognitive, right? I forgot exactly how much it was, but from the sensorial to the cognitive, there's like a 1000x information loss. But at the same time, it's that information loss which allows for abstraction to exist. So you create cubes, you create the shapes, the primitive shapes and symbols that are known from the mental world. And then those, in turn, affect the material world again, right? Such as math, geometry. We bend the material world, to those abstractions. And then those affect the sensorial world again, because the world now is changed, so we experience it differently, and therefore it gives you different ideas again. So it's always in this flux, always in this flow from one state to another. These 3 are always working together so that the dialectic of the world unfolds. This is the world spirit. It's these 3 things through us interplaying with one another so that they can evolve civilization and society. So if I start doing circles around here, each one of these is a literal revolution, right? I keep going. And I can do all these revolutions around it. Ignore that. Because all of them are interplaying with each other. And now, here's the thing. We could completely do such things as, for example, this part over here, the discovery of fire. This part over here, discovery of the wheel. Bronze. You can do a bigger jump. Iron. Paper. Writing. Okay, writing could be this one. Writing. Then, sorry, not writing. Press. The press. I want to go farther in time. The press. Steam. Electricity. But now here, let's see. This is modernity. So you got your TVs, your cars, and everything that is a part of modernity. Why does it suddenly stop? It's not stopping. It's just that these revolutions are happening closer and closer together, as if approaching like a singularity or something. So right here you could have your TVs. Right here you could have your computers. Here, internet. And here at the very last one, we have AI. And every following revolution will be standing right in place. It will just be saturating. The part where AI stands in. But why? Why does it look like this now? Well, because during the entirety of history, there was always a degree of separation where the new information that was created could be processed and remembered and passed on. That was always the case. But at some point, our efficiency became so large, our efficiency to create something and the input and output became so close together that the information that we now spew out with AI can no longer be rememberable or be passed on. It can no longer be, it is undistillable due to the sheer quantity of it and how much it saturates our notion of truth. So how can we distill it into information that's worth passing on, and it's not just a bunch of garbage? Well, we probably can't, but we will have to find our way in order to go from this into something positive. And this is where society changes from a force of positively progressing to negatively progressing. And I don't mean that everything's going to become like hell. I mean, we're going to have to start filtering. We're going to start erasing. We're going to have to destroy contents, create filters and contexts and whatnot, in order so that we don't drown in uselessness and be unable to completely tell apart real from fake. So, for the first time in our historical progress, we're going to be in a post-historic age. We're going to be living in a post-historic age because there is nothing that can be remembered for future historians to write in. There's going to be so much chaos, so much saturation of content, and undistillable of fake from real, and the ensuing schizophrenia at mass from that there will be periods here that are completely non-historic. They cannot be rememberable. And if history is the recording of moments to be retrieved in the future, then there is nothing here that can be remembered. There's nothing here that can be retrieved, that can be recorded. Because everything will be the deluge of fake stuff, thanks to generative AI. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about generative AI. So yeah, seeing the whole of civilization as this process, from material to sensorial to mental back to material, this is what generative AI is going to do to us. It's going to close in the loop, and it's going to clog it, because there will be simply too much for one to be interpretable by the other, and that's scary. Anyway, this is my meta socio-technological visualized dialectic, and that's about it. It looks crazy, but I really don't think it's that off the hook. Let's go back.
So now we can see there is an event horizon close to us, one that can separate history from post-history, the later defined by the inability to qualify any type of information due to overwhelming, dubious, unreal saturation and loss of human capacity and willingness to tell things apart. What can be recordable or rememberable in such a state? Think of historians looking back at this period where real and unreal became indistinguishable. And a return to hard empiricism is impossible due to our reliance on digital infrastructure. It'll be void. We are living in the void century. Sorry, got ahead myself there as a One Piece fan. But it is true that the distilling of any true food will become exponentially more difficult. And the mostly jobless generation, without the proper social progress in tandem with the technological progress, will find very little reasons to leave the system intact. But what I'm scared about is where all this desperation, schizophrenia, will be aimed at, considering that in an endless ambivalence of truth and falsity also paints wrong targets everywhere. So I'm again forced to think that this will end in chaos. I wish I had the belief that society will see this coming and respond it aptly and on time, but the time was before yesterday. The AI developments are always faster than regulation, so law is always automatically outdated. So the one thing left is acceleration, but again, without steering, the only possible destinations are to collide with an obstacle or to go off course and off of a cliff. Are you really ready to think about such things? Do you think it's just about art anymore? Art reflects the society which created it. I'm telling you to stop looking at the reflection and look at what is casting it. Slop is a symptom. That's why it won't go away. The illness is the war big tech is fighting against reality itself, which is also why slop remains slop, because the context it's continuously given, inevitably changes the course of any possible perception which could qualify it as its own thing. It is not a thing, it's the sludge between things, occupying time but never satisfying the palate. And God have mercy on us, because 3D slop is actually real and occupying real space in the real world. Yes, I'm talking about 3D printed AI generated stuff and the new business models it opens up. So yeah, that's the future we left for your kids. Hopefully they'll enjoy big tech's wealth extraction. At some point they won't need that many workers, but clergy and the corresponding techno-gospels. I mean, what is there to do except to speak the holy word of Apple or Google or Microsoft or OpenAI? Well, generative AI as a medium has deception at its very core. They can deceive you either way they want. And people can continuously deceive themselves. AI as a medium uses people. It pressures humanity to become the worst version of itself. I hear often the comparison to Wall-E, that will become thoughtless, lazy blobs, always manipulated wholesale by algorithms. I actually think that POV to be too optimistic. In the movie, only a small percentage of humanity got to live that hedonic lifestyle. The rest? Well, look at Earth. Look at what Wall-E had to clean up. 99% of humanity died because of by and large grew past our means of sustainability and left only pollution in its wake. UBI won't save you. Podcast bros won't save you. AI won't save you. There is no such thing as adapt or die, only adapt and die. I'll repeat this as many times as it takes. Generative AI is the most blatant example of the tragedy of the commons that's ever been made. When everyone is super, nobody is. But your dependence on these systems means the compromise of everything you could have ever been. Hence that the difference will take away from your pockets and put them in big tech's stash. I see no other option but a total systemic overhaul. But that's dreaming, isn't it? How can a system so powerful and omnipresent change to another without the price of millions of deaths and countless suffering? The top brass will never allow themselves to be brought down. Their techno-capital will successfully make us fight within ourselves by manipulating our emotions with endless simulacra. Pareidolia, the ELIZA effect, at a mass scale will be weaponized to a degree never seen before. To the point these companies can get away giving human right to their own products. What? You think that's outside of the cards? You think that's outside of the possibilities? Why then do all AI developers compare their systems to human learning, or even just human beings in general? The illusion of creating digital sentience can only take away from actual real sentiences. If I delete lemma tree from my computer, am I committing murder? The AI is not alive. It does not possess autopoiesis, which all life has. All life is infinitely complex because on how it relates to its environment, always interchanging particles, and that environment to a larger environment, and so on until we'll talk about astronomy. All in the real world, not probabilistic spaces. But generative AI as a medium deceives you. You won't be asking these questions. You'll form fake bonds with clankers and never learn what you and you yourself could have become. The best version of yourself. The abstract is confused with the real. It all can perhaps go back to 0, which is not a real number. How many dimensions are there? 3? 4? 12 if you believe in string theory? What about there's 1 dimension? What? That's crazy. But really, if there is no 0 anywhere in reality, then there is no such thing as x equals 0 or y equals 0 or z equals 0. Only the measuring of such by using mental abstractions. In actuality, there's always a value for all x, y, and z. There aren't 3 dimensions. There is the 3rd dimension only, empirically. We cannot disassemble x, y, and z if we are to remain in mid-space. Abstractly in math? Sure. In reality? No. It's confusing the measure with the measured. Why is this important in AI? Because it is the same mistake committed again. This being what happens when you take the humanities out of the picture and only STEM remains. Simply because AI is capable of syntax does not mean it is capable of semantics. One thing does not imply the other. The multidimensional probabilistic spaces used to train AI aren't real, actual physical spaces. This should be obvious, but we never think about these things in a philosophical manner. We simply accept it. AI as a medium incentives you to accept everything at face value. What? Are you gonna doubt the sum total of all human knowledge? This is something already happening. Students trusting AI over their teachers, for example. AI clouds expertise. It deprofessionalizes in a world where you need to become a professional to achieve average income. And with time, all this will feel normal. But it will be a new normal that's insanely unsustainable, be it due to the resources it consumes or the mental impairment it will cause at a global scale. Because as a medium, AI incentives everything without any filter. And what is that? What is the unfiltered sum total of everything rolled into a something? It's slop. It's all slop. No matter the quality, it's still slop. It's okay, you can enjoy slop. But if it makes 99.9999% of everything, well, have you read The Library of Babel? It's a story by George Luis Borges, where there is a place where every book that could ever be written exists. Every possible combination of letters to make up functionally infinite books. You know what most books are in that scenario? Gibberish. Random combinations of letters amounting to no meaning. They go insane trying to find a singular meaningful sentence. That's our future. Finding truth or meaning will be flooded by slop. So whoever can create a filter to identify all AI content from non-AI gets to it. The future of the world might just lie in your hands. We need identifiable metadata and its filterings. Another thing to mention is not to affiliate AI with any sort of political alignment. If you associate it with right-wing politics because it's more often used there, then let me tell you that communists easily embraced this tech as well. Generative AI is meta-political. Peter Thiel claimed the technology could be alternative to politics. As much as I hate to admit it, he might be right. Not because it should, but because it seemingly will so. Technology is the crux, not ideology. Ideology bends to technology, not the other way around. In other words, as generative AI swallows up the world, if your opinion on this topic is wrong, then you are wrong about everything else. For Slop will leave no crevice untouched. Whatever your beliefs are, they are downstream from here. So get informed, get curious, and attain wisdom. For in the world where intelligence is artificial, only worldly wisdom has a chance to save you. I don't know if it's techno-feudalism or whatnot that's waiting for us at the end of this cave as we descend further. But I know I care. And as caring becomes scarcer and AI abundant, I believe we'll at least be able to create a small oasis of meaning amidst the endless grey goo on this artificially generated culture will produce. Because the best you can be is what you must become, even if no one turns to look at you. For most of us, this is not a story about saving the world, but about saving yourself. Most people don't use it as a tool, but as automation. Therefore, they are already on the wrong path. It is difficult not to corrupt yourself with the ease it provides. How can you claim to be the creator of something you didn't write, or code, or compose or draw? The machine itself would be the creator in these scenarios, but we already covered that a non-sentience cannot be an author. So we have people like Shad M. Brooks claiming to be an author of AI-generated pieces of art because he provided an original sketch. But AI is still doing most of the heavy lifting. Even if this wasn't the case to be the most outrageous one. There are people that in order to keep the illusion of being an artist, generate entire videos of AI painting the time-lapse, increasing the layers of unreality. How far can one go in order to feign importance and skills? One thing to note is that Shad M. Brooks here is just being a businessman. No argument will sway him or people like him. He saw that the quota for real artists strongly defending AI art was not yet filled, and he happily embraced it. It is not a question of his principles or ideology. For many, this is just the case. The business idiot class will embrace AI without further thought in order to meet imaginary quotas. I recommend everyone to watch the following TED Talk, where a tech bro will, with a company based around AI video models, proudly claims the end of basic literacy in trade of a fully visual utopia where even your basic emails are fully interactive AI videos. Some wild nutjob shit. Sci-fi excuses overlaying an impoverished reality. But there he is, being applauded by a TED crowd as he shows yet another AI video model and comes up with yet again the same excuses. Every generation complains about the next. And such chronic bullshit we are already covered up with here. It really is a showcase of how far tech bros' minds can go off. Now, I am not entirely against AI. It's just very difficult for a corruptible or impressionable mind to know how such a thing should be used. And I believe this would happen to most people, to be most people. Perhaps in the future, curation will be a profession. We fill the earth and the net with so much garbage that most jobs become of negative nature. To remove as opposed to produce. Perhaps we will start having rituals of some sort to reintroduce scarcity and meaning. Or media literacy will become more important than ever. We of course need watermarks and metadata on everything AI generated. Perhaps there will be political action to push against governments bought by big tech. And we are seeing in the UK's Labour Party, for example. But all these things seem unlikely, at least to happen on time and well done. It pushes for a level of organization and power and talent we might not have at all. Still, one man does raise his lighter to protest the same place every day. He'll change nothing about the world, but he is not doing it to change the world, but not to allow the corrupt world to change himself. Big tech, low life. Cyberpunk is not just fiction anymore. It just appears to be much lamer in reality. Deny all accelerationism. We must not prize efficiency above all else. We'll just end up efficiently destroying ourselves. You need not wait for AGI. The real threat is already here. As the adoption rate increases, so does our inability to respond. This is class war, and a war against reality. Don't give your kids iPads. Don't give yourself excuses to indulge. If you want there to be meaning in the world, your attitude from here on out must be based on negation. For most things are negative. It is happiness that is negative, and pain that is positive. For when you step on a needle, all your concentration goes to that one part, whereas happiness is the negation of such things happening to you. Language is negative. Structuralism tells us a word means something by being much more unlike all other words than being similar. Negation is every measure we can come up with so that the fire cooks and warms and not burns our surroundings. Most new technology has far more downsides than upsides when it tramples through our status quo. What is electricity without our circuit breakers, semiconductors, and all other apparatus which makes it go wherever we want at the quantities needed? What is water without all the pipe networks going inside our walls? Directing it, negating all the hazardous paths. These, once again, the same. Most paths are hazardous, so we must negate them. If you've read the Techno-Optimist Manifesto, you've seen an AI billionaire saying the exact opposite of what I'm saying here. But this is because he can afford your suffering the consequences. Negation is our path. May we study it like a skill. Going back to McLuhan, what he meant by the medium is the message, is that the contents you see on television matter very little to the fact that you do indeed watch a lot of television. The contents become muddied. In this case, whatever you do with generative AI matters very little against the fact that you use a lot of generative AI. This is how mediums become messages. It too is based on negation. To be a negationist, you are someone willing to naturally filter good from bad. Negation isn't resignation, it's a discipline. Remove what erodes meaning so what remains can be cultivated and passed on. A full-on techno-optimist embraces the medium in all its shapes. A slop eater and slop producer he becomes. Garbage in, garbage out. The future does not need you. You won't get the permit to the lifeboats. Is there even reason for something like an upload button to remain untouched? After all, the second Google has a slop generating machine such as VO3 or Sora 2, they no longer really need creators to be a part of the bargain, and can essentially start absorbing all the AdSense revenue to themselves. They can effectively start replacing the upload function with a generative one. How much damage can reality take before it gives in? Before I leave, I think it'd be important to say that if you want to fight this, then you have to acknowledge that the battle will be ugly. As in, there is no space to uphold yourself to some I'll never use AI virtue and come on the other side clean. You'll have to copy and paste AI generated works by tech bros, and put them on Etsy or social media in order to prove that none of these things they spew out can reach actual ownership. You'll need to create fake accounts showcasing the worst aspects of generative AI. Parse out what is AI and what is not to your family members. You yourself becoming the filter. It's ugly, disgusting even. But in order to make a dent, these are the type of things that are needed. There is no creativity going on in the AI Bros community. You have to sow the seeds to showcase that. In this video, for example, I used a lot of AI imagery, but I will not credit any of them, because I don't consider them to be created by anybody. They exist in a diffuse ether, waiting for anyone to grab them. Hopefully you take some meaningful message out of this essay. At this point I'm pretty lost myself. I don't normally do things like this, but AI is so over-encompassing and paradigm shifting that the silence we still yield is our passivity to get drowned by it. I refuse that. Hopefully, in at least some aspects, you will too. Goodbye.